Hi, this is Dave, Fell Running Guide. Welcome to this week's navigation task. We've got a tricky one this week. We've got a route choice from A to B. So from this sheepfold here over to the Cloven Stone. But what I'm saying is that it's foggy conditions, so visibility is very poor. So you have to think about how you're going to do that journey in bad visibility. So obviously any compass bearings need to be very precise. Any pacing needs to be precise. You can't just hope that you're going to see features in the distance. What are the other difficulties of this journey? Well, there aren't that many paths on the map. One thing to note is this black dotted line here isn't a path at all. It's just a political boundary, so there's not necessarily anything to see on the ground there, so don't think you can hit this and follow it to the Cloven Stone. It is not a path, so that's a problem. Also, there aren't many kind of tick-off features or attack points. Well, there are some, but not as many as you might want. So let's have a look at some things there. So for example, we've got this high point here, 633, but that's going to be quite difficult to locate because you see it's only 3 meters higher than the surrounding contour, which is probably, you've got a 300 meter area there, and sometimes trying to define exactly what is the high point on something like that is tricky. Even in bad weather, you stand on what you think is a high point and look over to your right and another bit seems a bit higher, so you go to that and look back where you've come from and the one you were previously at looks a bit higher. Add the difficulty of really bad visibility, then it would be quite hard to state that you're actually right on the top of that if you wanted to find it. Other things that we could look at or use are the area around Cloven Stone itself. So let me just remove that B so we can have a look a little bit more clearly at the ground. So that might be a bit clearer without the B on it. So let's look at the area around here. Well, we have a real distinct change of steepness of the slope. So if we were coming down this ridge here, see at this point here the contours are quite wide apart, and then immediately after the Cloven Stone there the contours really tighten up. So that's called a break of slope, where the slope changes angle. So we might notice that. And also above it, you see we've got this much wider area here, so we might be able to locate that. Just zoom in a little bit so we might be able to see a little bit more detail too. Other things that we've got that we might be able to navigate by. We've got this thing here called a bield, which is a shelter, so it's probably an animal shelter, a stone shelter, not too dissimilar from a sheepfold. We've got one of those there as well. We've got a cairn there, whether or not we'll be able to find that in the fog. We've also got this boundary corner here where it says the stake. We might be able to locate that if we came to from a different way. And another thing is we've got this reasonably obvious change of direction of Sinan Gill here. See, higher up the stream is draining from east northeast, and then at this point here, just about the 550 contour, it changes to draining much more from the northeast. So that change of angle there we might use as an attack point. Other things to note, this symbol here and this symbol here and these symbols here are marshy ground, similarly around here, around the stake. So if we got into those, it might make going rather unpleasant. So those are things that we can look at. What about some route choices. Let's have a think about some of those. So we're already on this black hazel beck. So one way of getting over to the other side would be to actually use the beck as a bit of a handrail to navigate by, aiming to climb the beck and then maybe use the head of this stream here to then cross over into this Sin and Gill over here. This is quite a steep-sided beck, so it wouldn't be too difficult. It wouldn't be particularly easy being right in the stream bottom. So it might be that we come up the east side of it and round and cross over higher up and up here, and then take a bearing across into Sin and Gill. Or depending on how much water's flowing down it, we might cross over here and come up the west side of it, noting the head of that stream there, and then to there. But then from there, come across on a south-westerly bearing, aiming for this gill here. One thing we'd have to be careful of doing that is we'd have to make sure that we were accurate on that bearing, and we hit the top of this stream here. We wouldn't want to make the mistake of getting the bearing wrong and hitting this ridge here and thinking that we were coming down this ridge. So quite an accurate bearing required across there. So we could do that, and then once we hit this Sin and Gill, we have an option. You could hit the head of it and take a bearing straight across, almost due west, looking for it. I'd be tempted to get closer and use a more definite attack point, and that could be there, as I mentioned before, that change of angle of the stream, and that is pretty much on our 550 meter contour. So we could either contour in on that or take a direct bearing from there, measuring distance and pacing out until we got there, noting this change of slope angle from quite a flatter part of the landscape to much steeper just below it. So that's one approach. Another approach would be to use this white gill here and cross over Black Hazel Beck, and a rising line southwest was to hit the head of this gill here, and then take the bearing across the plateau here. Now some people suggested finding the high point and taking a bearing directly down southwest was down the slope, possibly passing this cairn en route. That probably work in good visibility. You wouldn't need to go much wrong though to slightly miss that stone. Again, you've got the change of slope angle to stop you dropping too far, but it would need a very accurate bearing from there, all that distance over, to hit it exactly. So you could do what we did the previous option, which was to hit Sin and Gill and find that point and go in from there. So those are a couple of options there. What about taking a longer route? So what you could do is head down for the Cumbria Way all the way along to Skiddaw House, and then on the bridle way here find this boundary line, along it to this boundary at the stake, and then almost due east, climbing up to the Cloven Stone, which is a boundary stone. And again, you've got that break of slope telling you that the feature we're looking for is on the point where the slope changes from being steep to starting to flatten out. Now the disadvantage of that route is it's quite a bit longer than the others. You're going a long way around, but also you're dropping all this height here down Black Hazel Beck into here, probably about 350 meters here, and then having to climb all the way back up again to 550 meters here. Whereas this climb, if we climb over there, we might even just miss that high point and only have to climb up to 620 meters before dropping down. So a much shorter line and less climb on that. Now, something I haven't mentioned, and that is called aspect of slope. So what does aspect of slope mean? Well, if you imagine that you're on this slope here and you had a ball and dropped it, it would bounce straight down the hillside at 90 degrees to the contour lines. So if you're at the cloven stone and you drop the ball, it would pretty much go down the line of this boundary. If we're higher up, it would go slightly more north of west, and if we were on this area here, it would go more southwest. So that's a way that even in fog you'd be able to determine your position on the slope here based on your aspect or direction of slope. So I'll just put a few lines on the map for you to explain that. So if you see those red arrows, imagine that's the direction that the ball is going to bounce at 90 degrees to the contour lines, and that is called aspect of slope. So those arrows show some of the possible route choices. No definite right or wrong. If you got there, then that's the most important thing. But obviously some are a bit easier navigationally than others, and one of them is a bit longer and more climb. But I hope it was useful. Thanks for watching, and look out for next week's navigation task. Bye for now.